Thank you very much, Mr. Micah. I had a couple of questions. The Waste Book points out that we're potentially spending close to $700 million to promote healthcare.gov, a website that doesn't work. And I know that my colleague from Missouri, Billy Long, has a bill out that would require advertising purchased by the Federal Government to have a disclaimer like we have on political ads. You know, this advertisement was paid for with tax dollars. And sometimes it's difficult for the public to know. As somebody who worked in broadcasting, we ran PSAs, many of which came from government agencies, and we ran them for free and available commercial time. But in other cases, you've got the Federal Government paying for advertising. I certainly see a need for maybe advertising for recruiting for our military, but driving people to a website that doesn't work, or at least wasn't working well when some of these ads were running, seems to be a problem. Have any of y'all looked at government advertising expenditures as a source of waste?
Sorry, please.
We've looked a little more at sponsorships, for example, having agencies sponsor NASCAR, among others. So we've taken it from a little bit of a different direction. In terms of disclosure, it's not something we've thought about, but I think taxpayers do deserve that kind of transparency because they should know how that money is being spent.
I do think Mr. Long's bill would go a long way to at least raising public awareness of that. Mr. Edwards, you talked a lot about moving stuff to the private sector, and I'm a big supporter of that. I think the private sector with a profit motive and unburdened by as many rules and regulations as exist within government organizations is a good idea. But I come back to healthcare.gov. That was outsourced to a private company and had huge excessive cost overruns. We've talked a little bit about procurement reforms, but you can't just turn it over to the private sector and not have some sort of oversight on the contracting. And could you talk a little bit about that?
I absolutely agree with that. And to go back to what Congressman Davis said, the private sector, it's sort of a two-part partnership in the private sector. Companies want to earn profits, but what we want to do for public policy is we want to maximize competition in the private sector to peel away any excess profits. So companies want to earn profits, and other companies want to grab those profits, and that's why the private system of private sector works. With Federal contracting, it is a problem. We should absolutely minimize sole source contracts. The CGI Federal, I guess, the prime contractor on Obamacare. I didn't look in the details of that contract, but for Federal contracting, we should try to maximize competition every way we can, maximize transparency, maximize the transparency of these
we've also had some hearings with respect to contracting reform where, for instance, in building contracts, design-build contracts, you're going out and rather than coming to 3 or 4 finalists to come up with a very detailed proposal after the initial request, you're ending up with 10. So you've got huge costs associated with bidding for a government contract and the regulations associated with that have to get built in. So if you're only getting 1 of 10 contracts you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars bidding on, you've got to recover that cost somewhere else.
Yeah, but I mean, the private sector, that's the way the private sector works. The GE goes out and wants to buy, spend money on IT. They have, people, competing to contract. I think you're referring to the PPP sort of infrastructure partial privatization. I'm a big fan of that. I think it works well. You look at the Capitol Beltway in Virginia. It came, the private sector put $1 billion into that. It came in on time and on budget. So there may be some extra costs, but I think getting the private sector in, private management, and having contractors compete is the way to go.
All right, and I think both you and Mr. Schatz talked a little bit about centralizing IT for the Federal Government. Are we risking creating another massive bureaucracy in a government that looks like it can't compute its way out of a paper bag? Are we going to create a bigger problem, or are we going to solve something there?
I don't think I mentioned the word centralizing. I think we did talk about giving agency CIOs more authority because it is their job. That was part of FTAR, and I think it's important that they have more decision-making power. I will point out, however, that there were no CIOs until 1989 which begs the question why we didn't have that prior to that. And we've had other legislation since then to improve management. It requires continuous work because, as you say, it is so large and it is quite difficult. But competition is important, and I think that this legislation is also very important.
I see my 5 minutes went by a lot faster than I thought it would. So I'll
Thank you. Recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spears.